Have you been thinking of buying a 3D printer or maybe even starting a 3D printing business?
I'm here at my local library using one of their 3D printers for free. 3D printing is becoming more accessible but also powerful by the year, and I wanted to see what all the fuss is about.
I can talk freely again now. Like you, I don't have a lot of time on the side, so a few weeks ago I decided to see how deep into this topic I could get with the least amount of time invested. I documented my first experiences experimenting with 3D printing and was super surprised how easy it is to get started nowadays. Don't make the same mistakes I did, here's everything I learned. Quick one, if you're new here, hey, I'm Josh. I document these little experiments to hopefully nudge you to try something new too.
I've been wanting to try 3D printing for a while now. Recently I found out about a really cool opportunity. My local library actually allows for renting out of 3D printing time. This makes 3D printing so much more accessible than having to buy your own 3D printer. All you have to do to qualify is attend a class where they explain some basics of 3D printing, and then they hand you a sort of 3D printing license. That's where I just was. I don't know exactly what I'm going to make yet, but over the next few weeks I'm going to experiment with all things 3D printing.
Going into the first 3D printing session, essentially I was expecting a lot of things to go wrong from the get-go. I set up the 3D printer and connected my laptop as I had learned in the workshop. This was also my first experience using MakerBot Print. Once I had the model loaded up in MakerBot Print, the filament loaded up into the 3D printer, and in general the 3D printer being ready to go, I started the print of FlexiRex. Over some time, maybe 30-45 minutes, almost like magic, FlexiRex started to emerge. With every new layer, it was so cool to see how the 3D model I was seeing on my laptop screen was actually turning into something tangible. The print of FlexiRex completed without any issues, and I heard the success jingle of the 3D printer for the first time. It was tougher than expected to get the print from the base plate, and even harder than expected to remove FlexiRex from the raft he was printed on. I was super careful not to damage FlexiRex in any way, and there was still some excess material left to remove from the finished print. After that was complete, FlexiRex stood proud and tall. Inspired by this honestly unexpected first success, I went straight away to printing the second model I had come with. The other 3D model I had brought with me was this spiral fidget toy. The print again completed without any issues. I also had to clean up this print a little bit, but after that, it worked. All in all, a very successful first 3D printing session. So what exactly is 3D printing? Essentially what we're doing is we're printing out a digital 3D model layer by layer with a material of our choice. The most common consumer grade 3D printers are either PLA 3D printers or resin printers. In general, PLA 3D printers are more common than resin 3D printers. This is because even though resin 3D printers offer better results, they also involve a more complicated chemical process, which isn't very beginner friendly. What I'm using, what the library provides, is a MakerBot Replicator Plus, a PLA 3D printer. For the 3D models that you want to print out, you can either design them from scratch in any CAD software or even something like Blender, or you can just download any freely available 3D model online. The most common file format you'll find these 3D models are in is the .stl format. There's a huge 3D printing community online, so there's a whole variety of freely available 3D models to pick from. If you choose to do so, there's also a bunch of marketplaces that offer paid 3D models. These are usually a bit more specific, a bit more intricate, and the prices are very fair for the work that the designers put into them. Once you have a 3D model you want to print, you import it into so-called slicing software, basically transforming the 3D model into instructions for the printer. Depending on the 3D printer you use, the easiest way to do this is usually to just use the proprietary software that comes with the 3D printer. In my case, this is MakerBot Print. These are the most important 3D printing parameters that I had to fiddle with in the last few weeks. For one, there's infill. This defines how much material the 3D printer should use inside the 3D model, defining the structural integrity. The layer height defines the resolution of the print, usually ranging between 0.1 and 0.3 millimeters. You have to print with supports, which is supporting material you can break away later if you want to print into thin air. This is most relevant if you have any overhangs in your 3D prints. The base layer is the most important layer of your 3D print. For example, there's the option of including a raft, which is a stabilizing first layer that you also break away at the end. Throughout this first insight into 3D printing, I limited myself to simply downloading cool models and printing them out. 3D design is something I'd love to explore in the future. With the next few prints, I encountered my first problems. For example, I learned the value of printing with supports the hard way when I tried printing out a phone stand. Halfway through, while printing an overhang, it started to mess up badly. I was able to sort of salvage the situation by manually supporting that part of the print with my finger, until it had enough stability to continue the rest of the layers on top. I was printing at a different library, and another cool learning was that they used tape on the base plate. This made it a bit easier to take off the final print at the end. This design also had to be cleaned up a bit, but after that, you couldn't really tell that I went wrong too much. The phone stand was the first functional design I'd ever printed. It was really cool printing something that actually served a purpose. I used support successfully for the first time on a print that I made for my girlfriend, Gigi from Kiki's delivery service. The main print completed successfully and the supports were easy to break away. After that, I printed out the red bow tie in a separate print. Back home, I was able to paint the eyes white with an acrylic paint pen and then glued the bow tie onto Gigi. I'm really happy with how she turned out. I was also able to gain some first experience in a 3D design software, Fusion 360, when I printed out some cable organizers. I didn't actually do any designing, just adjusted some parameters that the creator had conceived. I wasn't able to fully finish this print because my time slot at the library had run out, but the functionality also ended up working decently well. I learned the importance of using a raft as a base layer when I tried printing without one for another fidget toy that I made. So the printer initially just printed out a jumbled up ball of filament. After adding the raft though, the print completed successfully.
I had printed a lot of smaller cool things, but to end off this whole experiment, I wanted to print something even cooler, bigger, a sort of final project. Again, I turned to the 3D printing community online and browsed the resources people had published. Eventually, I settled on a sort of iteration to the idea of a phone stand I had printed before. This time around an actual MagSafe stand though, I can snap my iPhone to. The print started and it was sort of a gamble with the dimensions. The designer had conceived the stand to perfectly fit the first-party Apple MagSafe Plugg, but since those are super expensive, I was planning on buying a random one off Amazon. This last print also completed without any issues, completing my almost perfect strain of beginner's luck. Again, after cleaning up the final design a bit, it felt and looked super cool. Now the moment of truth. Unfortunately, the MagSafe Plugg I had bought off Amazon was a bit too big. I filed away some material from the inner diameter of the stand and the puck then slotted in perfectly. And that's it, now I have a MagSafe charger. The library is super generous and doesn't charge for filament use, so essentially what I paid for this stand is the price of the MagSafe puck, which was like 10 euros. Since the stand is made out of PLA, it's a bit flimsy and not too heavy, but it supports my phone fine. It's such a cool addition to my desk and I'm really happy how it's turned out. Success!
Is 3D printing so easy that I'd recommend you go out and buy a 3D printer like right now? Nah. 3D printing is definitely going mainstream. It used to be this thing where only people who were really into the topic knew what they were doing, and now so many 3D printers are simply plug and play. As I tried to show in this video, it's really easy to get started with some small steps. There's an abundance of 3D designs freely available online, and if you have access to a 3D printer, all you have to do is download them and then print them out. This of course only scratches at the surface of what there is to discover. There's so many ways to approach 3D printing as someone who hasn't tried it out yet. For example, if you're more into 3D design, there's a multitude of print-on-demand platforms available online that will ship you a finished print straight to your door. Like me, if you're lucky, there may be some form of publicly accessible 3D printers in your area. These are becoming more and more common. And if you do end up deciding to buy a 3D printer, there's such a huge variety to choose from. Personally, I'm definitely interested in getting a 3D printer at some point. They're getting really affordable nowadays, and I'd love to not be tied to a specific time slot as I have been with the library printers. Alright, that's it for this first exploration of 3D printing. If you've watched this far, you're awesome. If you're interested in joining the email club where I update you on what's happening, the link is at the top of the description. Apart from that, I'll see you in the next one. Thank you so much for watching and have a great rest of your day.